Florida, 2019. A frantic 911 call echoes through the dispatcher's line. A man's down, attacked by a bird. But this was no ordinary bird. It was a cassowary, 6 feet tall, 130 pounds. The quiet back roads outside Gainesville, Florida, hid a secret most neighbors barely understood. Behind a modest farm fence, 75-year-old Marvin Hajos kept animals unlike anything the average Floridian would ever expect to see. He wasn't raising chickens, goats, or cattle. His passion was far stranger: exotic birds, some among the rarest and most dangerous on Earth. Visitors described the farm as both fascinating and unsettling. Tall enclosures lined the property, filled with parrots, peafowl, emus, and at its heart, 2 towering cassowaries. To the untrained eye, they looked almost prehistoric. 6-foot, flightless giants, with jet black feathers, turquoise blue heads, and a thick helmet-like casque rising above their eyes. They didn't chirp, they hissed. And when they walked, their clawed reptilian feet echoed like something out of the Jurassic era. Marvin adored them. To him, they weren't monsters, they were treasures. He had spent decades collecting and breeding exotic birds, caring for them with the dedication of a man who felt more at home among animals than people. Friends say his entire life revolved around his flock, that he often spoke about their intelligence, their mystery, their beauty. But beauty can hide danger. The cassowary, in particular, carried a reputation like no other. Nicknamed the world's most dangerous bird, it possessed claws sharp enough to gut a grown man in seconds. Wildlife experts warned against keeping them as pets, but Marvin believed his experience and care kept him safe. He had raised these birds, fed them daily, and earned their trust. Or so he thought. On this farm, a fragile balance existed between a man who loved exotic creatures and the exotic creatures that could kill him in an instant. And on one April morning in 2019, that balance shattered. April 12th, 2019. The sun had barely risen over Gainesville when Marvin Hajos stepped outside. At 75, most men would be enjoying retirement, moving slower, letting their mornings pass in peace. But not Marvin. For him, every day began the same way, checking on the birds. He walked the property with quiet purpose. First the parrots, squawking for their breakfast. Then the peafowl, strutting proudly in the morning light. The emus hissed softly, pacing their pens. To Marvin, each animal was a companion, a part of the family he had built over decades. But all of it led to one place: the cassowary enclosure. Inside stood Mary, the giant, prehistoric-looking bird that towered over Marvin's waist. Jet black feathers glistened in the sun. The creature's head shimmered with brilliant blue skin, the casque rising like a crown of bone. Its eyes, cold, golden, unblinking, watched Marvin's every move. To outsiders, a cassowary was nightmare fuel. To Marvin, it was routine. He moved slowly, calmly, tossing feed and clearing the ground. He knew the risks. Every handler did. One trip, one stumble, one wrong move in front of those dagger-like claws, and the balance of trust could shatter. But Marvin believed in his bond. He had walked into this enclosure 1,000 times. He wasn't careless. He was confident. What he didn't know was that today, a single misstep would set off a chain of events that would turn his morning routine into a scene of unthinkable horror. The cassowary was watching, waiting, and Marvin was about to make the fatal mistake of letting his guard down, just once. The morning was quiet. Too quiet. Marvin stepped carefully along the edge of the cassowary enclosure, a bucket of feed in his hand. He had done this walk countless times, but at 75 years old, his balance wasn't what it used to be. The ground beneath him was uneven, a mixture of soft dirt and exposed roots from the trees shading the pen. One misstep, that's all it took. Marvin's foot slid, the bucket clattered against the ground, and his body pitched forward. In that split second, his world flipped. He wasn't standing tall, the calm keeper in control. He was down, helpless, sprawled in the dust, the breath knocked out of his chest. And the cassowary noticed. The bird's head snapped up, its golden eyes locking onto him. To a cassowary, a sudden fall meant one thing: weakness, vulnerability, a threat, or worse, prey. Marvin scrambled, trying to push himself upright, but his age betrayed him. His movements were slow, unsteady. The cassowary advanced with deliberate, powerful strides, its talons clicking against the earth like knives dragged across stone. This was no farm bird. This was a living relic of prehistory, armed with claws sharp enough to disembowel a man with a single kick. Marvin's heart must have pounded as he realized what was happening. He was trapped in the worst possible position, flat on the ground, face to face with the most dangerous bird on Earth. The cassowary lowered its head, feathers bristling, throat rumbling with a low, growl-like sound. Marvin had fallen, literally, into a death zone, and now the bird was coming for him. The cassowary lunged. In an instant, the bird closed the gap, its towering body blotting out the sun. Marvin barely had time to raise his arms before the first blow landed. The cassowary's foot, a weapon as deadly as a tiger's claw, came down with terrifying precision. The inner toe, capped with a 5-inch dagger-like talon, slashed through flesh like paper. The sound was sickening, a tearing rip, followed by Marvin's cry of pain. Blood sprayed across the dirt as the cassowary reared back, only to strike again. Each kick carried the weight of a 130-pound bird built for violence. This wasn't flailing. It was methodical, targeted, as though the cassowary knew exactly how to disable a threat. Its wings flared wide for balance, and its massive legs drove downward, again and again, stabbing and ripping. Marvin tried to roll, tried to push himself away, but the enclosure offered no escape. The cassowary loomed above him, relentless, its talons hammering into his torso. A deep gash opened across his abdomen. His breaths came ragged, desperate, as the claws carved into him. For decades, Marvin had raised exotic birds. He had admired them, cared for them, even defended them. But now, the bird he had chosen to keep, the one others called a living dinosaur, was dismantling him with prehistoric fury. The ground beneath him was red, his body weakened with every strike. And in those horrifying moments, one truth was undeniable. The cassowary had become the executioner. Marvin lay sprawled in the dirt, his body shredded by wounds that bled freely into the ground. The cassowary circled him, towering, unblinking, its blue neck bobbing like a predator watching its prey weaken. Every attempt Marvin made to push himself up sent pain ripping through his abdomen where the talons had torn deep. His breaths grew ragged, each inhaling a battle, each exhaling a surrender. The massive bird tilted its head, studying him with eerie stillness. It didn't need to strike again. The damage was already catastrophic. The enclosure, once a space he had walked with ease, now felt like a prison. The high fences closed him in, no path to safety, no door within reach. Marvin's hands, slick with blood, clawed weakly at the earth as he tried to crawl toward the gate. Just a few more feet. Just one chance. But his strength was draining faster than the blood leaving his body. Outside, the farm was quiet. No one heard his calls. No one came running. Time stretched into cruel silence, broken only by the rasp of his gasps and the soft, heavy thump of the cassowary's steps in the dust. Marvin, the man who had spent his life among exotic creatures, was now trapped in the most horrifying irony. Dying not in the wild jungles of Papua New Guinea, but in his own backyard, at the mercy of the bird he believed he understood. In those final minutes alone, the farm became a battlefield, and the cassowary, the undisputed victor. Morning light broke over Gainesville, casting long shadows across Marvin Hajo's farm. For hours, the cassowary stalked its enclosure in silence, as if nothing had happened. But just beyond the fence, a horror waited to be found. It was a neighbor who first noticed something was wrong. The farm, usually humming with Marvin's presence, was too quiet. No movement, no signs of the man who had always been up at dawn. When he called out, there was no answer. And then, he saw it. Inside the enclosure, Marvin's body lay motionless in the dirt. His clothes torn, his skin marked with deep, gaping slashes. The bright, terrible red of blood had soaked into the soil. Nearby, the cassowary loomed like a sentinel, its piercing eyes fixed on the scene it had created. The 911 call came quickly, panic, disbelief, and urgency crackling through the line. "There's a man down. He's been attacked by his bird. It's one of those giant cassowaries." Paramedics rushed to the scene, but what greeted them was chaos. They couldn't approach immediately. The cassowary, 6 feet of muscle and claws, still paced the enclosure, feathers bristling, as if daring anyone to step closer. The bird that had gored its owner now stood guard over his body, a living wall of danger. Only once the bird was distracted could responders reach Marvin. But even then, it was too late. The wounds were catastrophic. Slashes across his arms, his torso, his legs. The talons had done their work with brutal efficiency. Marvin was still breathing when they reached him, but barely. Each breath was shallow, fading. His eyes fluttered open only for a moment, then closed again. As they lifted him from the ground, the reality became clear. This was not just a farm accident. It was something primal. A man, gored by what is often called a living dinosaur, a creature that had turned his passion into his undoing. Within hours, the farm that Marvin had built with pride was sealed off with police tape, and the cassowary, his prized bird, was no longer just an exotic pet. It was evidence. To look at a cassowary is to see a relic of prehistory, standing nearly 6 feet tall, weighing up to 130 pounds. This bird is not flightless by weakness. It is built for war. A thick helmet-like casque crowns its head. Its body is armored in dense, bristling feathers that resemble coarse hair. But it is the legs that make the cassowary feared above all other birds. Each leg is like a coiled spring, capable of propelling the animal through dense rainforest at speeds up to 30 miles per hour. At the end of each foot, 3 toes, 2 unremarkable, 1 utterly lethal. That inner claw, curved like a dagger, grows as long as 5 inches. Sharp, solid keratin. It doesn't just cut, it disembowels. When a cassowary strikes, it kicks forward and down, driving that claw into flesh with the force of a heavyweight's punch. Hunters in Papua New Guinea, who know this bird better than anyone, say it can open a man from chest to stomach with a single blow. That's not a myth. That's anatomy. Marvin Hayos had kept cassowaries for years. He admired their strangeness, their beauty, their rarity. But admiration does not erase danger. Experts warn that cassowaries are the only bird alive today that can truly kill a human without hesitation. They've split open dogs, maimed livestock, even sent hunters fleeing through the jungle. The Guinness Book of Records lists them as the most dangerous bird in the world, for a reason. And in Marvin's case, all of that power was concentrated in a single moment, when he fell to the ground, vulnerable, and the cassowary lashed out. Not once, not twice, but over and over. Every kick is a statement of dominance. Every strike a reminder that this bird, despite being raised in captivity, had never lost its wild, primal edge. For decades, people joked that cassowaries looked like modern dinosaurs. In Gainesville, Florida, that metaphor became literal. A man had been gored to death not by a lion or a crocodile, but by a bird. As word spread, the property became a scene out of a nightmare. Deputies and wildlife officers arrived, but there was no calm, only tension. Because while Marvin Hayos lay dying, the cassowary still prowled the enclosure. A bird that could disembowel a man with one strike. And had just done so. Authorities knew this wasn't like dealing with a stray dog or even a wild alligator. The cassowary was unpredictable, lightning fast, and capable of turning on anyone who came too close. Officers cautiously circled the pen, their weapons ready, every eye locked on the towering bird pacing just feet away. The cassowary hissed, its deep booming call echoing through the farm. Its long, talon-like middle claw, 5 inches of curved, knife-sharp bone, scraped against the dirt. To the deputies, it wasn't an exotic pet anymore. It was a living weapon, a reminder of why this species is called the world's most dangerous bird. But there was another complication. The bird wasn't wild. It was property. Florida law considered it a captive animal, and that meant authorities couldn't simply storm in and kill it. They had to restrain it, subdue it, and relocate it, without losing another life in the process. So the plan shifted. Wildlife officers brought in specialized gear, tranquilizer darts, and reinforced cages. Getting close enough to deliver the shot was like approaching a predator waiting to pounce. At any moment, one wrong move could send the cassowary charging, claws out, ready to shred anyone in its path. Finally, after hours of tense maneuvering, the The tranquilizer dart found its mark. The cassowary staggered, let out a guttural sound, and collapsed. Only then did officers move in to secure it, hands trembling, adrenaline still coursing, knowing they had just subdued the same bird that had ended its owner's life in seconds. For neighbors and first responders watching, the image was chilling. A prehistoric-looking bird, strapped down, carried off in a cage. A killer contained, but not destroyed. Marvin Hajos was gone. The cassowary he had raised was alive, sedated, and destined for relocation. But the question echoed louder than ever. Why had such a creature been allowed to live on a Florida farm in the first place? News of Marvin Hajos's death spread like wildfire, and with it came disbelief. A cassowary, a bird most Floridians had only seen behind reinforced glass at a zoo, had killed a man in his own backyard. For many, it sounded too bizarre to be real. But it wasn't fiction. It was a gruesome reality that shattered the quiet of a Gainesville community. Neighbors spoke in hushed tones, recalling the towering bird with its electric blue neck and horn-like casque. Some had occasionally caught glimpses of it pacing the fence line, but none imagined it could be lethal. Now, fear rippled through the area. If this bird could kill its owner, what would happen if it escaped? Reporters descended on the farm, cameras capturing the crude fences, the open pens, and the cages that suddenly looked far too fragile to contain a creature capable of disemboweling a human. Parents clutched their children tighter. Residents demanded answers. How was a private citizen legally allowed to keep such an animal? Florida's exotic animal laws quickly came under fire. Cassowaries were classified as Class II wildlife. Dangerous, yes, but still legal to own with the right permit. It stunned the public. A bird ranked alongside tigers and crocodiles in lethality could be housed in a backyard enclosure, just steps from neighbors. Wildlife officials defended their oversight, pointing out that Hajos had possessed the proper licenses. But to many, that was the problem. The law had allowed a man in his 70s to keep one of the deadliest birds on Earth, and now he had paid with his life. As media headlines branded the cassowary the world's most dangerous bird, a wave of horror rolled beyond Florida. International outlets from London to Sydney reported the story with the same mixture of shock and disbelief. People compared the cassowary to a living dinosaur, and images of its dagger-like claws went viral. But beyond the sensational headlines, locals wrestled with unease. This wasn't an accident on a safari or in a faraway jungle. This was a death caused by a prehistoric predator raised in a suburban Florida farm, and the question that haunted the community was chilling. Had this tragedy exposed a loophole in the thin line separating humans from the wild predators they try to tame? To understand the tragedy, you have to understand Marvin Hajos. At 75, he wasn't a reckless teenager chasing danger. He was a seasoned breeder who had spent decades surrounded by exotic creatures. Friends remembered him as a quiet man, but one consumed by his fascination with rare and unusual animals. For Marvin, cassowaries weren't monsters. They were marvels. He raised them with pride, showing visitors the strange, otherworldly birds, as if he were sharing treasures from another time. But passion can blur into obsession. Neighbors often questioned why he kept such unpredictable creatures on a farm with nothing more than chain-link fencing separating them from the outside world. Marvin would brush off concerns, insisting he understood their behavior, that he could manage them. And for years, he did. Until the morning when a simple misstep, a stumble to the ground, stripped away every illusion of control. The irony was brutal. The man who had devoted his twilight years to protecting and caring for one of nature's most dangerous birds was brought down not by malice, not by recklessness, but by the very animal he trusted. The cassowary did what it was born to do, react with violent, primal force. In the aftermath, those who knew him were left torn between admiration and disbelief. Was Marvin a victim of his own daring love for wildlife, or a cautionary tale of how devotion to dangerous creatures will always carry a cost? His death forced the world to look past the exotic allure and confront the dark reality. Even in captivity, even with years of experience, some animals cannot be tamed. The cassowary is often called a living dinosaur, and in Marvin Hajos's death, that title felt chillingly true. Standing over 6 feet tall, armed with dagger-like talons capable of slicing flesh in a single strike, this bird is nature's reminder of a time when survival was won through raw power and aggression. It doesn't negotiate. It doesn't hesitate. It reacts. Marvin's end was not just a freak accident. It was a brutal lesson carved into flesh. A stumble, a heartbeat of vulnerability, and the cassowary's prehistoric instinct surged forward, unstoppable. What happened in that Florida farm wasn't malice. It was nature revealing, without disguise, what it truly is: indifferent, dangerous, uncontainable. The world watched in disbelief. A man who spent his life devoted to exotic animals cut down by the very creature he believed he understood. His story became a warning etched into headlines across the globe. No matter how much we think we've caged nature, the wild always waits, patient, ancient, and ready. Marvin Hajos was remembered as a man who loved fiercely, but who, in his final moments, proved the cost of loving something that was never meant to be owned. Marvin Hajos believed his cassowaries were companions. In the end, one proved it was a killer. His death was as swift as it was shocking, a reminder that some creatures remain forever untamed. If this story gripped you, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next deep dive into the most chilling encounters between humans and the wild. And coming up, another tale where ordinary life collides with extraordinary terror. Stay with us. The next story will haunt you.